Hi class. So today we're going to talk about the digestive system, and we're going to go through all the parts of the digestive system, the organs and the other structures involved in digestion, and we're also going to talk a little bit about the enzymes that are involved, because the digestive system involves both mechanical or physical digestion along with chemical digestion. So this is a diagram of a digestive tract, and it starts obviously with the mouth. Within the mouth there are these special glands known as salivary glands, which are very important for producing saliva and also secreting enzyme known as amylase, which starts to break down the carbohydrates that you consume before they enter into this tube known as the esophagus, which is basically parallel. It lies parallel to the trachea of the respiratory system. And that esophagus leads eventually into the stomach. You can see it kind of right over here, the stomach. And then eventually the stomach will empty into the first part of the small intestine, which is known as the duodenum. And this all here is the small intestine, which eventually leads to the large intestine right over here, which connects to the rectum, which holds the feces before it is excreted through the anus. And along with this digestive system, the specific structures and organs, there are accessory organs, and this is right over here an accessory. It plays an important role in digestion as well, the liver, the gallbladder, and this is very important. This structure right here is called the pancreas, and we'll talk about all of that in this PowerPoint. So the digestive system is basically used for breaking down food into the nutrients that our bodies need for everyday life. Basically all the nutrients that our cells of our body need to function for what their purpose is. So the digestive system does the job of breaking the nutrients down small enough to pass into the circulatory system, and basically the circulatory system, as you know, will transport all these nutrients all over the body wherever they're needed. So what are nutrients? We've already talked about the nutrients before. So body cells need a constant supply of nutrients for energy and for building blocks. Nutrients include those biologically important molecules. We've talked about them many times before: carbohydrates, fats, proteins, vitamins, and minerals. Okay, so we need larger quantities of the first three, smaller quantities of those second or the fourth and the fifth nutrients. But we need all of these to be healthy and basically be able to have our cells function normally and optimally. With a variety of fruits and vegetables and meats and dairy products, we can achieve healthy living. So the digestive tract is basically, it's a long tube that it connects our bodies to the outside world. And it's where the food basically just passes along for the process of digestion until you get to the point where there is no longer digestion needed. So the mouth, the pharynx, the esophagus, the stomach, the small intestine, the large intestine, and then rectum, and finally the anus. And then again, I talked to you about the accessory organs that also play a role with digestion, but they're not really directly in contact with the food. Whereas these ones on the right-hand side are directly in contact with the food. So the salivary glands are very important. They mix the food with the saliva and the enzymes that break down the carbohydrates. The liver and the gallbladder, which is behind this tiny little bulb-like structure behind the gallbladder, and the pancreas is right over here, this kind of lighter colored organ, and it's kind of a longer structure, and it plays a very important role in regulating blood sugar. So there are 4 stages to basic digestion, or the processing of food. There's the ingestion stage, which whereby the food enters into the digestive system through the mouth. Then there's the digestion stage, which includes the physical digestion that happens in our mouth in the beginning. It also happens in our stomach, but initially in our mouth. Our teeth and our tongue basically break that food physically into smaller pieces. And then digestion, chemical digestion, happens as a result of chemical enzymes that also break down food into smaller and smaller microscopic molecules that can enter into the bloodstream. And these chemical enzymes, or digestive enzymes, are located in your mouth, your stomach, and your small intestine as well. And then we have absorption, which is where the kind of later on in the intestines, water and digested food enters into the bloodstream. This happens at the small intestine. The food enters into the bloodstream, and the water basically remains and is reabsorbed in the large intestine. And then finally, elimination, in which the undigested food, it's not, whatever's not needed by our body, it's not processed, it leaves the system in the form of feces via the anus. So steps of digestion, the first. So as you can see, the teeth are what physically break down the food. There's the molars, the premolars, the canines are right over here. There's 2 of them here. And then the incisors of the front. These are the biting teeth. Canines, basically, they do the tearing. As you know, that in dogs and other a lot of other animals, the canines are much more prominent because they have to basically kill their dinner in order for them to have to be able to do any form of digestion. The premolars are the ones that do the grinding, and the molars premolars do the crushing and grinding, and the molars will basically crush the food. Very strong type of teeth. Salivary glands, they will secrete saliva, which contains amylase, which begins the process of breakdown of carbohydrates. And the tongue basically mixes all that food with the saliva and eventually pushes that food to the back of the mouth. Has your mouth ever watered when you are thinking about something to eat, or you smell some type of food? That water is basically saliva. And it's something that you can't really control, and it allows your body to prepare for digestion. So bolus, this is the name of the ball of food that enters into your digestive system from your mouth. So from your mouth, you chew up all the food, and it basically becomes a ball of food, and that enters into the esophagus, and then eventually enters into the stomach from the esophagus, and that term is called the bolus. The uvula basically is this little flap over here, and it basically keeps the food from going up the nasal cavity when swallowing. And sometimes when you accidentally you cough or you laugh when you're eating, the food actually does go up into your nasal cavity and eventually it comes down. It's a very uncomfortable feeling. I've had this a few times happen to me. It's not nice at all, but it eventually comes back down. And then the pharynx is the top of the throat right here. And you can see that it basically lies on top of the larynx and connects to the esophagus. The larynx contains the voice box, and the epiglottis. The epiglottis basically covers right over here. Covers that. This is your trachea. You can see those tracheal rings right here. The epiglottis is a flap that covers the trachea so that the food, the bolus, enters into your esophagus and not your trachea. Steps of digestion number 2, from mouth to stomach. So the esophagus is that muscular tube that goes from your mouth to your stomach, connects your mouth to the stomach. And what happens along the esophagus as the bolus moves down into the stomach is what is known as peristalsis. And basically, it's a wave of muscular contractions. There are 2 types of muscles. There's circular muscles and there's longitudinal muscles here. And basically, when the circular muscles contract, they squeeze the food down. In this section, and then they relax and the longitudinal muscles will squeeze, and that causes the food to move further down into the esophagus. You'd think that because of gravity, the bolus just enters the stomach quite easily, but it doesn't. It's not an automatic process. It actually travels down the esophagus if everything's working properly. And eventually it will enter the stomach right here. There's a sphincter that controls the movement of food, because it doesn't want everything you eat to enter the stomach all at once. And this is right here. So the stomach is basically a muscular bag-like structure that continues with physical and chemical digestion. And there's that sphincter, what it's telling you is a circular muscle that can open and close. There's the esophageal sphincter that connects the esophagus or controls the food entering the stomach from the esophagus. And then there's also the pyloric sphincter, which keeps the contents from leaving the stomach too early and entering the small intestine. So there's 2 major sphincters. And there's a term called rugae, which are basically the folds within the stomach. If those folds were basically disconnected, there would be you would see a very long stretch of stomach. So this allows for muscular movement that increases the digestive process. So this is the folding that I'm talking about right here. And this is your pyloric sphincter and your esophageal sphincter. So you can see it controls the movement of bolus entering the stomach. And the pyloric sphincter over here controls the movement of digested food from entering into your small intestine right over here. And so this basically, sometimes these sphincters don't really work properly, and sometimes food will partially digested food will squirt back up into the esophagus and can cause ulcers. So they have to do things to fix that. So physical digestion, you can see that's happening here. The stomach churns also by the wave-like contractions called peristalsis, which break the food into smaller pieces. And then you also have chemical digestion. There's gastric juice that is produced by the cells in the stomach lining, so the inside of the stomach, which basically contains water, mucus, hydrochloric acid, and enzymes. Basically, it's really acidic in your stomach and needs to be in order for certain enzymes to function optimally. So, hydrochloric acid activates this enzyme called pepsin, which is an enzyme that is specifically designed to break down proteins. So cells in the stomach lining produce mucus. Mucus forms a barrier between the gastric juice and the stomach lining. And why is this important? Well, you want to protect that stomach lining from the hydrochloric acid, because that can damage the stomach lining again and cause ulcers. So when you have food mixed with these gastric juices, what you have, this mixture, is called chyme, which is different from the bolus. Now, this is chyme is what you find within the stomach, and bolus is what you find at the basically in your mouth and in your esophagus, entering into your stomach. So the small intestine, there's two main functions. You need to continue and finish the digestion of nutrient molecules. There's enzymes involved within the small intestine that will continue to break down those larger molecules into even smaller molecules. And then there's absorption that takes place. So when they're really small enough, they will enter into the bloodstream, so they can go wherever they're needed. If their proteins are needed or carbohydrates are needed, for example, glucose, amino acids, they will go to wherever they're needed once they enter the bloodstream. There are three main regions of the small intestine. Again, I mentioned before that the first section of the small intestine is the duodenum, and the jejunum is the second part, and the ileum is the third section. So duodenum is right over here, the jejunum is the middle part, and the ending is the ileum. The duodenum is the first 25 centimeters of the small intestine. Ducts from accessory organs join, forming one duct attached to the duodenum by what is known as the sphincter of Oddi. The three accessory organs include the pancreas, the liver, and the gallbladder. Okay, you can see right here, this is the sphincter of Oddi. There's the gallbladder and the liver right here. The pancreas will produce pancreatic juice that contains enzymes that break down proteins, carbohydrates, fats, and nucleic acids. It contains sodium bicarbonate, which will eventually neutralize the hydrochloric acid in the chyme that enters the enters the small intestine, because the small intestine is not going to be as acidic as the stomach. The liver, the largest organ in the body, it basically has 200 functions. Enzymes are hydrophilic, fats are hydrophobic, so enzymes cannot get to fats. So the liver produces what is known as bile, which is an emulsifier, and it basically helps the enzymes and the fats mix, and so that the fats are able to be broken down into smaller pieces. Gallbladder stores the bile until chyme triggers it to be released when it's needed. Absorption in the duodenum. So absorption happens. There are tiny finger-like projections in the inside of the duodenum. Right here, this is just one villi right here. So there's a whole bunch of folding within the small intestine, and these are called villi, and they contain thousands of micro villi. The duodenum contains thousands of microvilli, and each contains tiny blood vessel called a capillary. Remember, with the circulatory system, this is the tiniest, the thinnest blood vessel out of the three, and it basically will line all these organ systems so that gas exchange and nutrient exchange can take place. So within the small intestine, the proteins and the carbohydrates, the smaller monomers or smaller molecules will enter into the bloodstream from the small intestine, so that these nutrients can be taken away and enter the circulatory system to be transported around. Each tiny lymph capillaries called lacteals. And so the villi within that small intestine basically increase the amount of surface area so that maximum absorption of nutrients can take place. The jejunum is about 2.5 meters long, and it continues to digest and absorb micronutrients. And the ileum at the end is about 3 meters long, and at this part of the small intestine, only absorption takes place. No more digestion, and basically it pushes the undigested material now into the large intestine. Peristalsis continues throughout the entire digestive system, making that food move along the way. So the large intestine, so digestion doesn't take place in the large intestine. Absorption of water and salts takes place, and the waste material basically becomes more and more concentrated. So there's colon bacteria. There's bacteria in the colon or the large intestine. The colon is another word for the large intestine, and which is very beneficial for breaking down this undigested material. And finally, there's elimination. At the end of the large intestine, there's feces, basically, which is the condensed and leftovers of the food that we consumed, and bacteria. And this feces passes to the rectum, where it will be stored until your body is ready to excrete it. So the anus has 2 sets of sphincters, which it's controlled by us. So when the rectum is full, receptor cells trigger a reflex that causes peristalsis. What is a fart? So mostly made up of swallowed air. Colon bacteria produce hydrogen sulfide as a byproduct, and that's what you're smelling. So hydrogen sulfide smells like rotten eggs when you pass gas. And then there's another organ, accessory organ called the appendix. For a long time, it was thought that this was just kind of a useless part of the digestive system, but it actually, now we know that it is actually contains good bacteria that is important for digestion. So if we are very ill with severe diarrhea, the good colon bacteria will be flushed out of our digestive system, especially with when we use antibiotics for other illnesses. And the appendix is there to have a backup of good bacteria that your digestive system needs. And it quickly recognizes the colon after a bout of illness. It recognizes that there's not enough, and it produces and releases the bacteria. Appendicitis is basically when the inflammation happens of the appendix due to a blockage, and it can be fatal if it bursts and the person is not taken to the hospital and treated right away. So it must be removed if it becomes inflamed and blocked before it bursts. It's very, very painful. And that is the end of the digestive system. There are many different enzymes that are, in addition to the ones that I talked about, pepsin and amylase. But for the purpose of this lesson, and because this is the end of the course, I'm not going to go into too much detail, further detail about these other very specific enzymes that work on specific macromolecules. But I think this is a good overview of what the digestive system is and how it works. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will be sending some worksheets for you to work on with this PowerPoint lesson.